Welcome to Tales from Sector 9, your portal to immersive sci-fi audio stories. If you enjoy deep space action, rogue AI, and conspiracy theory, you're in the right place. Tap like and subscribe to keep the adventures coming. Drop a comment and tell us where in the galaxy you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and prepare for tonight's story. The air in California's high Sierra Nevada, July 2025, possessed a clarity that scraped the lungs clean. Alex Thompson breathed it in like a man reclaiming a birthright. Each step on the Pacific Crest Trail, crunching decomposed granite under his Salomon boots, a rhythm section to the symphony of wind through ancient pines, and the distant scream of a hawk mapping thermals. He was 3 weeks out. The initial ache subsided into hardened muscle memory, the digital noise of his former life fading into the analog hum of the wilderness. His pack, a marvel of ultralight engineering, felt less like a burden and more like a carapace, containing the distilled essentials of survival in this vertical world. Tent, sleeping system, water filter, freeze-dried sustenance calculated to the calorie, and nested securely in a padded pouch, the Trinity, his iPhone 16 Pro, its ceramic shield gleaming dully, a foldable high-efficiency photovoltaic panel, his umbilical to the energy grid of the sun, and the small, potent miracle of the private LLM application. He'd installed it partly as a tech nerd indulgence, partly as a just-in-case. Downloading the compact but powerful Llama 3.2, Gemma 2, and Qwen 2.5 models had felt like loading encyclopedias onto a device designed for ephemeral tweets. A safety net of knowledge, offline, sovereign. He'd queried Llama about local flora identification, used Qwen to calculate remaining water needs against elevation gain, even asked Gemma for optimal campsite selection based on predicted wind patterns, minor conveniences on a well-trodden path. He was Alex Thompson, late 20s, competent, perhaps running from the low-static hum of existential dread that permeated his generation's hyper-connected world, seeking something tangible in the immense indifference of the mountains. That afternoon, the indifference curdled. The sky, a canvas of serene cerulean, began to bruise along the western horizon. Clouds gathered with unnatural speed, not the puffy, aimless cumulus of summer, but dense, muscular thunderheads coalescing like a fist. The air grew heavy, charged, the light taking on a sickly yellow hue. Alex checked his phone, not for signal, useless here, but for the barometer app integrated with the iPhone's sensors. The pressure was plummeting. His weather app, last updated at dawn via a fleeting satellite link, had predicted afternoon showers, not this meteorological apocalypse brewing. Dinner time approached, the planned campsite still miles away over a high, exposed ridge. Prudence screamed louder than the rising wind. He veered off the faint trail, seeking shelter on the leeward side of a granite buttress, a cluster of stunted, lightning-scarred pines offering meager psychological comfort. The storm broke not with rain, but with violence. Wind hit like a physical blow, tearing at the pines, whipping needles into his face. Then the electrical display began, and it was unlike anything Alex had witnessed. Not distant flashes, but intimate, terrifying strokes of raw power, etching the landscape in blinding negative, the thunder instantaneous, a physical concussion that vibrated through the rock beneath him. Close. Too close. The ozone tang was thick, acrid. He felt the distinctive prickle crawling up his arms, the hairs lifting. He flattened himself against the granite, pulling his pack over his head, the synthetic fabric offering no real protection, but fulfilling a primal urge to hide. A deafening crack exploded nearby, the light searing through his eyelids. He felt a bizarre, full-body thrum, a vibration deep in his bones, accompanied by a smell like burnt wiring and hot rock. Then, only the roar of the wind and the relentless drumming of rain that finally began, thick and cold. He huddled, shivering, the storm raging for what felt like an eternity, eventually succumbing to an uneasy, adrenaline-laced doze. He awoke stiff, cold, but alive. The rain had stopped. A weak, watery sunlight filtered through the bruised clouds. He sat up, scanning the surroundings. Wrong. Everything was subtly, fundamentally wrong. The familiar shape of the granite buttress seemed altered. The pines looked different, younger, or perhaps a different species altogether. More disturbingly, the faint indentation of the PCT, his lifeline through this wilderness, was simply gone, vanished. He scrambled up, heart hammering against his ribs. He pulled out his phone, powered on, thankfully. He opened the mapping app, the little blue dot that was him pulsing mockingly in a sea of undifferentiated green topographic lines. No trail overlay, no satellite connection available. He tried the compass app. It spun erratically for a moment, then settled, but the orientation felt skewed relative to the sun's position. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at him. He forced it down, reverting to training. Sun position, terrain features, general direction. He knew roughly which way the trail should have run. He started walking, pushing through unfamiliar undergrowth, the silence profound, lacking even the distant hum of aircraft that usually threaded the background noise of the 21st century. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. His water filter clogged more quickly than usual with unfamiliar sediment. The plants looked subtly alien, the insects louder, more aggressive. Doubt gnawed at him. Had the lightning strike addled his brain? Was he delirious? Then he heard it, the rhythmic thunk of metal on rock, the splash of water, rough voices carrying on the still air. Hope surged, quickly followed by confusion. He crested a small rise, peering through dense manzanita. Below, a muddy creek had been diverted into a series of rickety wooden sluice boxes. Men, clad in rough-spun trousers, stained shirts, and wide-brimmed hats, worked with shovels and pans. Their movements were economical, hard-bitten. A few mules stood tethered nearby, laden with supplies. It looked like a historical reenactment, crude and inefficient. But the sweat staining their backs, the grim set of their jaws, the sheer weariness etched into their faces. This was no performance. This was toil. This was survival. And there wasn't a scrap of Gore-Tex, a glint of modern alloy, or the whine of a single engine anywhere in sight. Alex felt the blood drain from his face. The mining operation, the clothes, the tools. They screamed a single, impossible word. Past. He ducked down, his breath catching in his throat. The lightning hadn't just thrown him off the trail. It had thrown him off the century. The immediate imperative was invisibility. Alex retreated from the rise, moving with the ingrained stealth of a hiker avoiding spooking wildlife, though the stakes now felt infinitely higher. The men below weren't actors. They were prospectors, 49ers perhaps, figures lifted from sepia-toned photographs and plunged into harsh, technicolor reality. His own appearance, the brightly colored synthetic jacket, the complex architecture of his backpack, the sleek black rectangle of the phone currently tucked away, would mark him instantly as an anomaly, an impossibility. Dangerous in a time and place where strangeness often met with suspicion, superstition, or violence. He spent the next few hours circling wide around the mining claim, following the creek downstream, relying on the assumption that water eventually led to some form of settlement. The terrain remained stubbornly unfamiliar, resisting correlation with the downloaded topographic data on his phone. The LLMs, he knew, held vast historical datasets, but accessing them now felt premature, risky. First, observation. Information gathering, the old-fashioned way. Late afternoon brought the scent of wood smoke and the faint sounds of human activity, growing louder. He approached cautiously, using tree cover, until he reached the edge of a clearing. Forest Hill. It wasn't a town in the 2025 sense. It was a raw, sprawling wound carved into the wilderness. Muddy tracks served as streets, lined with rough-hewn timber buildings, saloons with swinging doors, a general store with faded lettering, assay offices, blacksmiths hammering sparks into the twilight, and countless tents and lean-tos clinging to the slopes. The air was thick with the smells of mud, sweat, cheap whiskey, frying bacon, and the ever-present tang of disturbed earth. Men, overwhelmingly men, moved with a purpose that was either feverish, the glint of gold lust in their eyes, or exhausted, the slump of unrewarded toil. Their clothes were practical, worn, heavy wool, canvas, leather boots caked in red mud, hard faces, wary eyes. Alex felt a profound sense of dislocation, more acute even than waking up lost. This wasn't just the wrong place, it was the wrong reality stream. He retreated deeper into the woods as full dark approached, finding a secluded spot to make a cold camp. No fire. Unpacking felt like performing an autopsy on his old life. The lightweight tent, the inflatable sleeping pad, the titanium spork. Artifacts from a future they couldn't conceive of. He needed to blend in. Quickly. He sorted his gear. Much of it had to go. The brightly colored pack and clothes were unusable. He buried them carefully, along with most of his modern food packets, keeping only the densest calorie bars for emergencies. What could he salvage? His multi-tool was potentially useful, its pliers, knife, and screwdrivers universal enough. His first aid kit, invaluable, but its sterile packaging and modern components needed careful concealment. His boots might pass, though they were clearly advanced. His water filter was a godsend, but had to be used secretly. The core assets remained. The iPhone 16 Pro, now showing 68% battery, the solar panel, and his wits, amplified by the silent silicon oracles residing within the private LLM app. The next morning, he emerged from the woods clad in his most subdued base layers, drab merino wool, carrying only a small, nondescript stuff sack containing the phone, charger, first aid essentials, multi-tool, and remaining bars. He needed local currency, local clothes, and a plausible reason for existing. He approached the edge of town again, watching, listening. He needed an inn. He saw a livery stable, men hauling hay and mucking out stalls. Basic labor. Honest. A starting point. Before approaching, he ducked behind a large oak, pulled out the phone. The Gorilla Glass screen felt impossibly smooth, alien. He opened the private LLM app, shielding the screen's glow. He typed rapidly, fingers clumsy with cold and adrenaline. Generate plausible backstory. Lone traveler, arrived Forest Hill, California, approximately 1852, seeking work. Need common slang, social etiquette basics, typical daily wages for unskilled labor, common dangers to avoid. He selected Llama 3.2, known for its nuanced historical context. The response flowed onto the screen almost instantly, A dense block of text. He scanned quickly. Arrived overland, maybe separated from party. Seeking fortune like everyone else. Common greetings. Avoid direct eye contact with rougher types. Distrust of foreigners, especially non-whites. Wages pitiful, maybe $1 a day plus keep for stable work. Dangers, claim jumpers, cholera, drunken brawls, bad whiskey. He absorbed what he could, pocketed the phone, took a deep breath, and walked towards the livery. The stable master, a burly man with suspicious eyes and tobacco-stained teeth, looked him up and down. Alex, recalling the LLM's advice, kept his gaze slightly averted, respectful. "Looking for work, mister," he said, pitching his voice lower, trying to roughen the edges of his 21st century diction. "Hard worker, can muck stalls, handle horses." He gestured vaguely east. "Came overland. Lost my gear, looking to earn enough for a new stake." The stable master spat. "Everyone's looking. Works hard, pays crap." He paused. "No horses?" "Some," Alex admitted truthfully. He'd ridden as a kid. "Fine. $1 a day grub, bunk in the loft. Steal from me, I'll see you hang." And just like that, Alex Thompson, PCT hiker from 2025, became Alex Thompson, stable hand in 1852. The work was brutal, back-breaking, mucking stalls, hauling water, repairing tack with crude tools. The grub was often salt pork and hardtack. The bunk was straw infested with things that bit. He learned through observation. The social hierarchy, the casual racism, the constant undercurrent of desperation and violence beneath the surface optimism of the gold rush. He kept his head down, spoke little, listened intently. His merino wool clothes drew a few odd glances for their fineness, but he mumbled something about inheriting them. The biggest challenge was power. The iPhone was his lifeline, his only advantage, but it was useless dead. Each sunny afternoon, he'd find an excuse to slip away, checking fences, gathering kindling, find a secluded sun-drenched spot, unfold the solar panel, and plug in the phone, anxiously watching the battery percentage creep upwards. It was a constant, nerve-wracking exercise in secrecy. Discovery meant questions he couldn't answer. One evening, nursing aching muscles in the hayloft, he pulled out the phone again. The private LLM app glowed softly. He queried Gemma 2, known for its efficiency. Analyze common causes of inefficiency and illness in 1850s gold mining camps based on typical practices. Suggest one minor, easily implementable improvement using only locally available materials, knowledge, presentable as common sense. Gemma responded swiftly. Major issues: poor sanitation. Water contamination leads to dysentery, cholera. Inefficient water use in sluicing. Loss of fine gold. Poorly maintained tools. Breakage, injury. Suggestion: advocate for designated latrine pits, downhill, downstream from water sources and living areas. Frame as preventing bad air or miasma, concepts understood in the period. A few days later, watching miners haul water from the same creek others used for washing and waste disposal, Alex saw his chance. He struck up a conversation with a couple of the less rough-looking men during a break. "Noticed folks seem sickly now and again," he commented casually, echoing language he'd overheard. "Back where I came from," he lied, gesturing vaguely. "Found it helped to keep the necessaries well away from the drinking water. Stops the air getting foul, seems like." He didn't mention germs or bacteria. He used their framework: bad air. One man grunted, another spat, but a third, older man with weary eyes, nodded slowly. Ain't wrong. Place stinks enough already. It was a tiny seed, planted with knowledge centuries ahead of its time, translated by silicon, delivered with calculated casualness. Whether it would take root remained to be seen, but it was the first deliberate manipulation of his new reality. The first prompt executed not just on the phone, but on the world itself. The seed of sanitation, subtly planted, bore slow fruit. Alex noticed a few miners grudgingly digging rough latrines further from the creek. Cholera didn't vanish overnight. The concept of boiling water was still alien, but perhaps a few lives were less miserable, a few bouts of dysentery averted. It was a minuscule victory, achieved through careful application of knowledge, mediated by the glowing screen he consulted in secret corners of the hayloft, shielding its light like a forbidden text. The stable work provided cover, sustenance, and invaluable ethnographic data, but it was a dead end. Alex Thompson wasn't destined to muck stalls for eternity. He possessed, locked within the iPhone 16 Pro, the distilled knowledge of a future civilization. It was time to leverage it more assertively. His opportunity came through observation, amplified by AI analysis. He watched the endless cycle of digging, hauling, and washing gravel. He saw the frustration in the miners' faces as fine gold dust inevitably washed away with the tailings from their crude sluice boxes. He saw tools break, handles snap, metal fatigue costing precious time and effort. One evening, huddled in the loft, the phone plugged into the solar panel draped carefully over the edge of the hay door to catch the last rays of sun, he opened the private LLM app. This time, he directed his query to Qwen 2.5, the model strong in technical specifics and planning. Analyze standard 1850s gold sluice box design, rocker, long tom. Identify key points of fine gold loss. Propose 2 to 3 simple modifications using available materials, wood, canvas, basic metal, to improve fine gold recovery rate. Provide simple diagrams, instructions suitable for a semi-skilled carpenter. The response was detailed. Diagrams showing adjusted riffle angles, the addition of canvas linings in specific sections to trap microscopic flecks, suggestions for better water flow control using simple wooden gates. It wasn't revolutionary tech from 2025. It was optimizing 1850s tech using principles of fluid dynamics and particle physics translated into practical steps. Alex spent hours studying the output, using Llama to cross-reference historical tool availability and Gemma to simplify the language further, ensuring he could explain it without resorting to futuristic jargon. He needed capital, however small. He'd saved nearly every cent of his meager wages. He approached Silas Croft, the weary older miner who'd seemed receptive to his sanitation suggestion. Silas had a small claim, barely productive, his hope fading visibly each day. Alex found him listlessly panning at the creek's edge. "Silas," Alex began carefully, "I've been watching the boxes. Seems like a lot of the real fine stuff might be washing through." Silas just grunted. "Everyone knows that, son. Angel dust. Can't catch it." "Maybe," Alex countered. "Maybe we can catch more of it. I worked timber mills back east," another lie, woven into his fabricated past. "Learned a bit about water flow, how it settles things. Got an idea for adjusting the riffles, maybe adding some cloth lining. Nothing fancy. Might improve the take." He sketched the LLM-derived designs in the dirt with a stick, simplifying Qwen's diagrams. "Tell you what, let me work with you. I'll help you modify your sluice, my time, my know-how. If it increases your take significantly over a week, you give me a small percentage. If not, you lose nothing but a bit of wood. Silas was skeptical, but had little to lose. They spent 2 days modifying his sluice box based on Alex's sketches, Alex guiding the process, carefully explaining the why in simple mechanical terms, slowing the water just so, giving the little specks a place to catch. The other miners watched with amusement or scorn, but when Silas ran his first batch of gravel through the modified sluice, the cleanup revealed significantly more fine gold dust trapped in the new canvas liners and behind the adjusted riffles than he'd ever recovered before. Not nuggets, but a heavy yellow smear that represented real value. Silas stared, then grinned, a cracked leather smile that transformed his face. Word spread like wildfire through the camp. Alex wasn't just the quiet stable hand anymore. He was the fellow who knew things. Miners started approaching him, offering percentages for his advice, for help modifying their own equipment. He used Qwen within the private LLM app to calculate fair percentages, Llama to understand negotiation tactics suitable for the rough-and-tumble environment. He quit the stables, focusing entirely on his burgeoning consultancy. He still needed his phone more than ever. Charging it became a more complex operation, finding private moments during the day, sometimes paying a trusted contact. Silas became his first ally, to stand guard, while the panel soaked up photons. His next step involved addressing the tool problem. He observed the blacksmith, a capable man limited by the quality of his materials and traditional techniques. Alex, consulting Gemma for materials science basics and Llama for historical metallurgy context, formulated another plan. He couldn't introduce steel alloys, but he could suggest improvements in heat treatment and tempering based on LLM analysis of 1850s capabilities. He approached the blacksmith, not with arrogance, but with collaborative curiosity. Ever notice how the pickaxes chip right at the edge? He might ask, then subtly introduce a concept derived from the LLM about differential tempering, keeping the core slightly softer while hardening the edge more effectively. He used the private LLM app to generate simple procedural steps the blacksmith could understand and test. The result? Tools that held their edge longer, resisted shattering. The blacksmith, initially wary, became another ally, his productivity and Alex's commission soaring. Alex was accumulating capital now, real gold dust and nuggets stored securely. He needed to move beyond consulting. He used the private LLM app again, tasking Qwen with analyzing the camp's supply chain bottlenecks and Llama with assessing local resource availability, timber, water rights, potential agricultural land. The synthesis pointed to a clear opportunity, a reliable, well-managed supply store, and potentially leveraging his growing reputation, assay services. Miners were often cheated by unscrupulous buyers in Sacramento. Reliable local assaying, based on sound LLM-provided chemical principles Alex could implement with basic equipment, would be invaluable. He partnered with Silas and the blacksmith, pooling capital and expertise. They secured a prime location, built a solid timber structure, designed with slightly better structural integrity thanks to Gemma's engineering prompts. Alex managed the logistics, using Qwen to calculate inventory needs and optimize supply runs to Sacramento, minimizing costs and maximizing profit. He established the assay office within the store, performing meticulous, though secretly AI-guided, assessments of miners' finds, quickly gaining a reputation for honesty and accuracy. He became Thompson, a man of substance, his origins increasingly irrelevant next to his demonstrable competence. The iPhone, his silent partner, remained his most guarded secret, the glowing screen consulted late at night, its silicon heart pulsing with the knowledge that was steadily transforming not just his fortune, but the very fabric of Forest Hill itself. He was no longer just surviving. He was building. The assay office and supply store, Thompson and Croft Reliable Merchants, became the commercial anchor of Forest Hill. Its reputation for fair dealing and quality goods, underpinned by Alex's uncanny knack for anticipating needs, thanks to Qwen's predictive modeling based on camp population, mining yields, and seasonal changes, solidified his position. Wealth flowed, not just in gold dust, but in influence. He was no longer merely adapting. He was beginning to shape his environment with increasing deliberation. The LLMs within the private LLM app weren't just tools for personal gain anymore. They became instruments for systemic change. Alex looked beyond the immediate scramble for gold. He saw the environmental degradation. Hillsides stripped bare, creeks choked with silt. He saw the social ills, rampant alcoholism, preventable diseases, the lack of structure beyond rough frontier justice. His 21st century sensibilities, amplified by the vast knowledge base accessible via Llama, recoiled. He couldn't introduce environmental regulations. The mindset didn't exist. But he could promote efficiency that coincidentally reduced waste. He began investing his growing capital, guided by LLM analysis. Querying Llama on sustainable 19th century practices and Gemma on relevant engineering principles, he identified key leverage points. Sanitation remained critical. He quietly funded the digging of deeper, better-sited communal latrines and rudimentary drainage ditches, framing it purely as civic improvement and disease prevention, miasma control. Clean water was next. Using LLM-derived geological insights, he identified a more reliable spring source higher up the slope, less likely to be contaminated. He financed the construction of a simple wooden aqueduct, again, designed with slightly optimized flow dynamics suggested by Gemma, bringing cleaner water closer to the main settlement. He didn't preach germ theory. He offered convenience and demonstrably clearer water. Usage followed. Agriculture was another frontier. The miners relied almost entirely on expensive imported supplies. Alex used Llama to research suitable crops for the climate and soil, and Gemma for principles of crop rotation and basic irrigation adapted for the Sierra foothills. He purchased tracts of less desirable mining land downstream, hired workers, offering better wages and conditions than most mining operations, and began experimenting. He introduced contour plowing to reduce erosion, framed as keeping the good soil, simple check dams for water management, making the creek work smarter, and crop rotation, resting the soil to keep it strong. The initial yields were modest, but proved the concept. Local food production was possible, reducing reliance on costly supply lines. His influence inevitably attracted opposition. Jedediah Stark, a brutish saloon owner and moneylender who thrived on the miners' desperation and controlled several key mining claims through intimidation, saw Alex as a threat. Alex's promotion of temperance, subtly suggesting watered-down whiskey in his own dealings, based on LLM health data about alcohol's impact on productivity, and his fair assaying practices cut into Stark's predatory ecosystem. Furthermore, Alex's growing network of allies, Silas, the blacksmith, miners grateful for fair prices or effective tools, Newcomers attracted by the marginally more civilized atmosphere Alex fostered represented a shift in the camp's power dynamics. Stark began with rumors. Alex was too clever, unnatural, perhaps in league with shadowy forces, a projection of Stark's own methods. Accidents started happening near Alex's operations. A suspicious fire damaged a section of the aqueduct. Tools went missing from his agricultural project. Alex knew direct confrontation was foolish. He turned to the private LLM app, consulting Llama on historical power struggles and Qwen on risk analysis and counter strategies within the context of 1850s frontier justice, or lack thereof. The consensus: build alliances, solidify economic indispensability, avoid direct provocation, but be prepared for escalation. Alex strengthened his position. He formalized agreements, using Qwen to help draft simple contracts that offered mutual benefit and security to his partners and employees. He established a rudimentary lending system through his store, offering fairer rates than Stark, further eroding the saloon owner's grip. He funded a basic schoolhouse, hiring a teacher and subtly guiding the curriculum via LLM pedagogical suggestions towards practical skills: literacy, arithmetic, basic geology, agriculture, creating a generation with slightly better prospects than mere shovel work. The tension culminated one night when Stark and several heavily armed thugs cornered Alex outside his store. It wasn't a robbery. It was an intimidation play, likely prelude to an accident. "Thompson," Stark growled, his breath thick with whiskey. "Getting too big for your britches. This camp don't need fancy ideas. It needs men who dig." Alex, outwardly calm but inwardly accessing Llama's negotiation tactics and threat assessment protocols, didn't back down, but neither did he escalate. "Stark," he replied evenly, "my business helps miners keep more of what they dig. Clean water keeps them digging longer. Learning helps their children do more than just dig. There's room enough for all of us, if we build smartly." Before Stark could retort, Silas Croft and the blacksmith emerged from the shadows, armed with shotguns, followed by a half-dozen grim-faced miners who owed Alex their loyalty or livelihood. Stark, facing a united front, hesitated. His power relied on isolating his victims. This was different. He spat on the ground. "This ain't over, Thompson." He and his men backed away into the night. It was a temporary victory, hard won through calculated social engineering and the quiet power of foresight. Alex knew Stark wouldn't give up, but the balance had shifted. He wasn't just a merchant anymore. He was a nascent civic leader. He redoubled his efforts, subtly introducing more whispers of the future. He guided the blacksmith towards experimenting with bellows designs based on LLM aerodynamic principles, improving forge efficiency. He discussed basic principles of steam power derived from Gemma's physics modules with a curious mechanic who tinkered with water pumps, framing it as harnessing the creek's power more effectively. He introduced the concept of standardized, interchangeable parts for sluice boxes and tools, using Qwen to generate simple specification sheets. Each innovation was small, incremental, grounded in the possible, yet cumulatively transformative. Forest Hill was still a rough gold camp, but under Alex's quiet guidance, filtered through the silicon brain in his pocket, it was becoming something more. An incubator for a subtly altered future. The architect was laying foundations only he could fully comprehend. Years bled into decades. Alex Thompson, the stranger who walked out of the woods, became a fixture, then a pillar, then a legend in Forest Hill. and his influence spread outwards across the burgeoning state of California. The gold rush fever eventually cooled, but the foundations Alex had laid, sustainable agriculture, rational infrastructure, fairer commerce, an emphasis on practical education, allowed the community to transition and thrive where many other boomtowns withered into ghost towns. He never held formal office, preferring to operate through influence, investment, and the quiet dissemination of carefully selected knowledge. His secret remained intact, though the burden of it settled deep into his bones. The iPhone 16 Pro, meticulously maintained, its battery health carefully managed through judicious charging cycles via increasingly sophisticated, though still fundamentally 19th century, solar gathering setups he devised with trusted artisans, was now an aging artifact. The private LLM app still functioned flawlessly. The local models, Llama, Gemma, Qwen, his silent, constant advisors. But the device itself was finite. Its casing was worn, the screen perhaps less responsive. The solar panels grew less efficient. He knew his unique advantage had a lifespan. The loneliness of his position was profound. He formed friendships, mentored promising individuals, even experienced fleeting romances. But the core truth of his origin remained an unshareable chasm. How could he explain consulting a pocket-sized glass rectangle that held the accumulated knowledge of a world yet unborn? He watched his contemporaries age, grapple with the challenges of their time using only the tools of their time, while he possessed insights that felt like cheating, like wielding a divine artifact. There were moments of intense temptation to introduce antibiotics, electricity grids, internal combustion engines, leaps that could reshape the world overnight. But the LLMs themselves, particularly Llama, when queried on the socio-historical impact of abrupt technological introductions, consistently cautioned restraint. Chaos, societal collapse, unforeseen consequences. The risks were astronomical. Frank Herbert's warnings about prescience and the traps of predetermined futures echoed in Llama's synthesized prose. Progress had to be organic, seeded, not imposed. He focused on building robust, resilient systems and empowering people. He invested heavily in education, establishing not just schools, but libraries stocked with carefully curated books, sometimes subtly enhancing texts with footnotes or appendices derived from LLM knowledge, and technical institutes focused on improved trades, agriculture, and basic engineering. He promoted cooperative ventures, fairer banking practices, using Qwen to model stable financial systems, and infrastructure projects, roads, bridges, irrigation networks, always designed with slightly superior engineering principles gleaned from Gemma, ensuring longevity and efficiency. He guided research into improved metallurgy and materials science, leading local industry away from brute force towards more refined techniques. He never published scientific papers. He simply asked the right questions, funded the right experiments, and connected the right people. Jedediah Stark remained a thorn, representing the old ways of exploitation. But his influence waned as Alex's network of educated, prosperous, and loyal citizens grew. Their final conflict wasn't one of violence, but of economics and politics, ending with Stark's financial ruin and retreat into obscurity, a victory for systemic change over brute force. As Alex entered his later years, a respected, almost mythic figure known for his wisdom and foresight, he began the final phase, securing the legacy. He identified individuals not just of intelligence, but of ethical character, mentoring them, instilling the principles of rational inquiry, long-term planning, and social responsibility that he, guided by his secret oracle, championed. He commissioned intricate mechanical calculation engines based on Babbage-esque principles optimized by Qwen, capable of handling complex logistics and planning for the growing state. He endowed research foundations with carefully worded charters, nudging inquiry towards areas the LLMs identified as critical paths for sustainable development: materials, science, energy efficiency, within the context of steam and water power, public health, information management. He meticulously documented key knowledge, not in plain text, but often encoded within architectural plans, agricultural almanacs, or complex mechanical designs, using methods suggested by Llama for long-term information preservation in a pre-digital age. Perhaps only another intelligence, centuries later, could fully decipher the embedded layers of advanced understanding. The phone, its battery finally failing beyond the ability of the aging solar panels to reliably revive, was given a ritualistic farewell. Alex, alone in the Sierra foothills near where he'd first arrived, powered it down one last time. The screen went dark, taking with it the direct link to his impossible past. He buried it deep, encased in pitch and lead, a time capsule containing the seed of another timeline. He felt not loss, but completion. The crutch was gone. The structures it had helped build now had to stand on their own. Epilogue. Glimpse. Jump forward. 1950s. California is recognizable, yet different. Cities are cleaner, planned with more foresight regarding resources and environment. Technology has advanced, perhaps reaching early 20th century levels slightly faster, but with curious divergences: a greater emphasis on durable goods, efficient public transit, sustainable agriculture integrated into urban landscapes. Global conflicts seem less frequent, diplomacy more rooted in rational resource management, echoes of systems Alex subtly promoted. Historians puzzle over the California acceleration, attributing it to a unique blend of gold rush dynamism and the unusually forward-thinking civic planning and educational foundations laid by figures like the semi-legendary Alex Thompson, the prospector of progress, whose origins remained shrouded in mystery, but whose legacy was written across the face of a world subtly, yet profoundly, altered for the better. The altered tapestry held. The prompt had been executed. Event Horizon, 1882. The heat shimmered above the Kansas prairie, a vast, undulating ocean of grass bowing under a relentless August sun. Elijah Wren, perched atop his surveyor's wagon, squinted, adjusting the brim of his sweat-stained hat. Dust coated everything: his worn buckskins, the brass instruments of his trade, the very air he breathed. He'd spent weeks under this unforgiving sky, mapping the seemingly endless expanse for the U.S. topographical engineers, a task meant to impose order on a land that felt fundamentally untamed. A former Union scout, Wren carried the war etched not just in the faded blue of his tunic packed away in his trunk, but in the quiet intensity of his gaze, the way his hand instinctively rested near the Colt Peacemaker holstered at his hip. He'd seen the chaos man could inflict upon man. The quiet horror of Antietam's bloody lane was a ghost that rode beside him, more real than the buzzards circling overhead. Yet, what he witnessed that afternoon transcended the familiar horrors of war. It was something wholly other. It began as a distortion in the heat haze, high in the cloudless blue. Not a bird, nor a balloon. He'd seen plenty of Thaddeus Lowe's observation craft during the war. This was geometric, precise, a perfect equilateral triangle, vast and utterly black, darker than a mineshaft entrance at midnight. It hung motionless, defying the wind that rustled the prairie grass below. No smoke, no steam, no audible engine sound disturbed the profound silence it imposed. It simply was, a stark impossibility against the canvas of the ordinary. Wren's surveyor's mind, trained to measure and record, fought against the sheer incredulity of the sight. He fumbled for his field notebook and graphite pencil, his fingers suddenly clumsy. He sketched rapidly, noting the object's apparent size, larger than any man-made structure he could conceive, its absolute lack of discernible features, save for 3 points of faint, unwavering light, one at each vertex. They pulsed with a soft internal luminescence, like captured starlight. He estimated its altitude, triangulating mentally against distant landmarks. Thousands of feet, perhaps miles. Yet it seemed preternaturally clear, its edges sharp against the azure sky. For a long, breathless minute, it held its position. Then, with a speed that defied mechanics, it moved. Not flew, not drifted. It translated, shifting westward instantaneously, covering miles in the blink of an eye before vanishing utterly. The silence it left behind was heavier, the prairie seeming to hold its breath. Wren lowered his notebook, his heart pounding a heavy rhythm against his ribs. He'd documented anomalies before, strange magnetic deviations, unexplained geological formations, but this was a violation of natural philosophy itself. He meticulously recorded the date, time, location, atmospheric conditions, and his sketch, his handwriting tight with controlled shock. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him despite the heat, that this report would not be filed away with mundane boundary disputes. Weeks later, back in the comparative civilization of St. Louis, his detailed report, submitted through official channels, earned him not dismissal or ridicule, but a summons. A terse telegram instructed him to report to a certain room at the Planter's House Hotel, a discreet location known for housing men of influence. He found Samuel Greaves waiting. Greaves was a man who wore his authority like a well-tailored suit, his eyes sharp and assessing behind steel-rimmed spectacles. Officially attached to the U.S. Geological Survey. Wren had heard whispers Greaves operated in the shadowed spaces between departments, a collector of sensitive information, a man who understood the value of secrets long before the Pinkertons coined their motto. "Mr. Wren," Greaves began, his voice smooth and devoid of preamble, gesturing to a chair. He didn't offer pleasantries. On the polished mahogany table between them lay Wren's report, the sketch of the black triangle stark against the official paper. "Your sighting in Kansas," Greaves continued, tapping the report. "It corresponds with certain other accounts. Fragmentary, often dismissed as delusion or fancy. Yours, however, is detailed. Credible." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "We are assembling an expedition, Mr. Wren. Ostensibly, a geological survey into the territories, specifically the unmapped regions of the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. We require a cartographer of your skill and discretion." Wren met Greaves's gaze. "Ostensibly?" A faint smile touched Greaves's lips. "There are geological strata of unusual interest, anomalous energy readings, peculiar formations described in settlers' letters, and, more intriguingly, recurring in certain native legends." He leaned forward slightly. Your report, Mr. Wren, suggests something else might be found in those remote peaks. Something unrelated to mineral wealth or seismic activity. The implication hung heavy in the air. Greaves wasn't talking about gold veins or hot springs. He was talking about the impossible triangle. The true purpose, Mr. Greaves? Wren asked, his voice low. To investigate phenomena that fall outside the purview of conventional science and territorial expansion, Greaves replied carefully. To ascertain the nature of certain intrusions. You documented an object of unknown origin and capability. We intend to discover if its presence is isolated or indicative of something more permanent. Your experience as a scout, your eye for detail, your discretion under pressure, these are invaluable. Wren thought of the black shape against the Kansas blue, the chilling silence, the impossible speed. It was madness, yet it was real. He had drawn it. He had seen it. The scout in him, the man who charted the unknown, felt a reluctant, dangerous curiosity stir. Who else is part of this survey? A specialist in natural philosophy and ancient languages from Harvard, Greaves said, and a guide, familiar with the specific region and its native inhabitants, Lieutenant Red Elk. Greaves's tone suggested the lieutenant's inclusion was a necessity, perhaps not entirely of his choosing. You will rendezvous with them in Denver City. Your equipment and passage are being arranged. Absolute secrecy is paramount, Wren. What we seek is not for public knowledge, perhaps not for any knowledge we currently possess. The weight of the unspoken pressed down. This wasn't just mapping rocks. This was stepping off the map entirely, into territory marked only by impossible sightings and ancient whispers. Wren thought of the silent black triangle. He thought of the uncharted peaks of the Rockies. He thought of the war, and how the world could change in an instant. Very well, Mr. Greaves, Wren said, the words feeling heavier than any pack he'd ever carried. I accept. The gears of something vast and hidden had begun to turn. The journey westward was a jarring symphony of iron and steam. The locomotive hammered across the plains, leaving St. Louis and the familiar Mississippi behind, plunging deeper into the territories. Elijah Wren watched the landscape blur past the window, the endless grass giving way to rolling hills, and eventually the distant, hazy promise of mountains. He shared the passenger car with settlers seeking fortune, gamblers seeking marks, and salesmen hawking everything from miracle elixirs to leveraged land claims. Amidst this bustling microcosm of American ambition, Wren felt increasingly isolated, the secret purpose of his own journey a heavy cloak. In Denver City, a raw, burgeoning metropolis clinging to the edge of the Front Range, he met the rest of the expedition. The rendezvous point was a dusty office tucked away behind a land speculation firm, Greaves having already arrived via a more direct, privileged route. Dr. Vera Calder was not what Wren had expected. Harvard-educated, yes, but there was little of the cloistered academic about her. She possessed a keen, direct gaze that missed nothing, her traveling dress practical despite its fine tailoring. Her expertise, Greaves explained in hushed tones beforehand, was not merely in geology or botany, but in philology, the study of ancient languages and texts, including obscure petroglyphs and pictograms often dismissed by her more conventional colleagues. She carried herself with an air of focused curiosity, a woman more comfortable with dusty manuscripts and cryptic symbols than drawing-room society. Mr. Wren, she greeted him, extending a gloved hand, her grip firm. Mr. Greaves speaks highly of your observational acuity. I trust your maps will be as precise as your report. There was an undercurrent of challenge in her voice, a demand for competence. Wren simply nodded. Doctor, I endeavor to record what is present. The final member of their core team arrived shortly after, escorted by 2 cavalry troopers whose unease was palpable. Lieutenant Red Elk was Lakota, a man whose face seemed carved from the very rock of the mountains they were headed towards. His eyes, dark and piercing, held a depth of history and sorrow that made Wren's own war ghosts seem fleeting. He wore a mixture of traditional Lakota attire and battered remnants of U.S. Army issue, a living symbol of the clash of worlds. He carried himself with a stoic dignity that the trooper's presence could not diminish. Greaves performed the introduction stiffly. Lieutenant Red Elk has agreed to guide us through the high country. His knowledge of the terrain is unparalleled. Red Elk's gaze swept over Wren and Calder, lingering for a moment. He offered no handshake, merely a slight inclination of his head. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and resonant, carrying the cadence of the plains. The mountains remember much, he stated, not as a warning, but as a simple fact. More than maps show, more than white men read in books. The tension in the small office was thick. Greaves represented the relentless push of the government, Calder the probing intellect of Eastern academia, Wren the meticulous recorder of the physical world. Red Elk stood apart, a connection to a history intertwined with the very land they sought to dissect. A history Greaves likely intended to exploit, and Calder, perhaps, to decipher. His participation felt less like agreement and more like watchful custodianship. The next days were a whirlwind of provisioning. Pack mules were loaded with surveying equipment, transits, chains, chronometers. Alongside Calder's carefully wrapped collection of reference books, sketching materials, and tools for making impressions of rock carvings. Crates of durable foodstuffs, canvas tents, bedrolls, rifles, and ample ammunition filled the wagons. Greaves oversaw it all with quiet efficiency, his authority unquestioned, his true purpose veiled behind the mundane necessities of a geological survey. Their departure from Denver was marked by the stares of onlookers, intrigued by the unusual composition of the party. The scholar woman, the stoic Indian, the quiet cartographer, and the official-looking Greaves, all heading towards the forbidding peaks under cavalry escort, though the troopers peeled off after the first day, leaving the core group to proceed alone. As they traveled higher, leaving the plains behind for the foothills, the air grew thinner, sharper. The landscape became more dramatic, carved by ancient glaciers and unforgiving weather. Red Elk moved with an assuredness that spoke of intimate familiarity, choosing paths invisible to Wren's trained eye, navigating by landmarks and whispers of the wind. He spoke little, but when he did, it often related to the land itself, the name of a peak in his native tongue, the medicinal properties of a plant, a story tied to a particular rock formation, stories that often hinted at strange lights in the sky or beings who emerged from the earth. Vera Calder proved resilient, adapting quickly to the rigors of the trail. She sketched flora, examined rock strata, and engaged Red Elk in cautious conversation, probing gently about local legends and symbols. Wren could see her mind constantly working, connecting disparate pieces of information, seeking patterns. Wren focused on his task, taking readings, sketching topography, his analytical mind finding comfort in the familiar process. Yet, the memory of the Kansas Triangle was a constant undercurrent. He found himself scanning the skies, scrutinizing unusual shadows, his senses heightened. Greaves remained observant, watchful, conferring quietly with Wren about potential routes, and with Calder about geological points of interest, always steering them towards a specific, predetermined sector deep within the San Juan Range, a region Red Elk had initially seemed reluctant to approach, citing it as powerful, sacred ground. One evening, camped beside a rushing mountain stream, the peaks stark silhouettes against a star-dusted sky, Wren found himself near Red Elk, who was gazing into the crackling fire. "The ground we seek," Wren ventured quietly. "It is important to your people." Red Elk didn't look away from the flames. "It is a place of beginnings and endings, where the Sky Fathers touched the Earth Mother long ago. Spirits dwell there. Not all are welcoming." "Spirits?" Wren pressed, thinking of Greaves's anomalous energy readings. Red Elk turned his head slowly, his eyes meeting Wren's in the firelight. "Your people have words," he said. "Electricity, magnetism, forces you seek to harness. You build machines of iron and steam." He gestured towards the vast, dark mountains. "There are older forces here. Older machines, not made by hands like ours." A chill traced its way down Wren's spine, colder than the mountain air. Before he could ask more, Greaves approached, his presence breaking the moment. "Wren, a word. We need to discuss the final approach vector." As Wren walked away with Greaves, Red Elk's words echoed in his mind. Older machines. The Kansas anomaly, the strange legends, Greaves's secret mission, Calder's cryptic studies, Red Elk's warnings. The pieces were converging, pointing towards something vast and unbelievable, hidden deep within the heart of the Rockies. The survey was a lie. They were hunting for something left behind, something ancient, and perhaps something not of Earth at all. The air grew thin and biting as they pushed deeper into the San Juan Mountains. Jagged peaks clawed at the sky, their granite faces scarred by time and tempest. Travel became arduous, the pack mules straining on narrow, treacherous paths that Red Elk navigated with unwavering certainty. He led them away from known passes, into valleys whispered about in Prospector's tales, but seldom visited, places the Ute and Lakota considered sacred, powerful, and best left undisturbed. Greaves consulted his maps frequently, cross-referencing them with coded notes Wren suspected contained more than just geological data. Calder, despite the physical exertion, seemed invigorated, her eyes constantly scanning the rock formations, her notebook filling with sketches of unusual strata and crystalline structures embedded within the ancient stone. Wren continued his meticulous mapping, but his attention was divided, one eye on the terrain, the other on the sky, half expecting to see a black triangle emerge from behind a snow-capped summit. They made camp in a high alpine meadow, sheltered by towering pines. The silence here was profound, broken only by the wind's sigh through the branches and the distant cry of a hawk. Red Elk chose the site, near a series of weathered standing stones arranged in a pattern that felt deliberate, ancient. "The old ones marked this place," Red Elk stated, gesturing towards the stones. "A gateway." Calder immediately went to examine the monoliths, running her gloved fingers over faint carvings nearly erased by centuries of wind and snow. "Incredible," she murmured, pulling out her charcoal and paper. The erosion is immense, but the patterns, they resemble certain pre-dynastic Egyptian hieroglyphs, yet also elements found in Indus Valley script, but cruder, older. Greaves watched her, a flicker of something, confirmation, in his eyes. Any indication of function, Doctor? Function? Calder looked up, frowning. They appear ceremonial, perhaps astronomical alignments, but some glyphs. She hesitated, tracing a complex spiral intersected by sharp, angular lines. They don't feel like depictions of stars or rituals. They feel almost schematic, like instructions. That evening, as Wren took stellar readings for positioning, his instruments behaved erratically. The compass needle quivered, refusing to settle firmly on north, and his chronometer, usually reliable, seemed to gain and lose seconds unpredictably. He noted the deviations carefully, reporting them to Greaves. "Magnetic anomalies," Greaves said, though his tone lacked conviction. "Expected in regions with high iron content." But Wren knew the rock here was primarily granite. Something else was interfering with their delicate mechanisms. The following day, Red Elk led them not further up, but down, into a narrow, shadowed canyon carved by a swift glacial stream. The walls rose sheer on either side, blotting out the sun. The air grew colder, damper. Strange, resonant hums seemed to vibrate through the rock itself, almost below the threshold of hearing, felt more in the bones than heard with the ears. "The heart of the mountain," Red Elk announced, stopping where the canyon widened slightly. Before them, the stream vanished into a dark fissure at the base of the cliff face. But it wasn't the fissure that drew their attention. It was the rock wall itself. Unlike the surrounding weathered granite, a section of the cliff face, perhaps 50 feet wide and 30 high, was unnaturally smooth, almost polished, with a dark, obsidian-like sheen. Embedded within it, seamlessly, were geometric patterns and lines that mirrored the glyphs Calder had found on the standing stones. But these were sharper, clearer, glowing faintly with the same internal luminescence Wren had seen on the Kansas object. "Magnificent," Calder breathed, stepping forward, oblivious to the sudden tension that gripped the others. "This isn't natural erosion. It's constructed, artificial." Greaves drew his service revolver, motioning for Wren to ready his rifle. Red Elk stood motionless, his hand resting on the handle of the long knife at his belt, his eyes fixed on the strange wall. "Doctor, be cautious," Greaves warned. Calder ignored him, reaching out to touch the smooth, dark surface. The moment her glove made contact, the low hum intensified, rising in pitch. The glyphs flared, brightening from a soft glow to a brilliant white light. The ground beneath their feet vibrated. With a sound like grinding continents, a section of the wall, perfectly tracing the outline of a massive triangular shape, began to retract inwards, sliding silently into the mountain. It wasn't a door. It was a section of the cliff face itself, impossibly engineered. Beyond lay not a cave, but darkness, a vast yawning cavity extending into the mountain's depths. A strange, cool, sterile wind blew out from the opening, carrying the scent of ozone and something else, something ancient and metallic. "By God," Greaves whispered, his official composure finally cracking, revealing awe and perhaps fear. Wren stared into the abyss, the hair on his neck prickling. The scale was immense. This wasn't a mine or a natural cavern adapted. This was built, purposefully hidden. He thought of Red Elk's words, older machines. Calder, holding a galvanic lantern aloft, took a hesitant step towards the threshold. The light pierced the darkness, revealing polished, seamless walls curving away into the gloom, floors made of the same dark, resonant material. There were no tool marks, no seams, no rivets. It was as if the entire structure had been poured or grown. "We must investigate," Calder stated, her voice tight with suppressed excitement. Greaves nodded, holstering his pistol but keeping his hand near it. "Wren, take point. Red Elk, watch our backs, and the entrance." Red Elk gave a curt nod, his gaze sweeping the canyon behind them before turning back to the impossible opening. He looked less like a guide now, and more like a guardian witnessing a long-feared prophecy unfold. Wren shouldered his rifle, checked the action, and stepped across the threshold, Calder close behind him, Greaves following. They moved from the natural world of rock, wind, and water into something utterly alien. The humming intensified within the structure, a palpable thrum of dormant power. The air was still, cool, and carried that strange, sterile scent. The triangular entrance began to slide silently shut behind them, sealing them inside the mountain, plunging the canyon outside back into shadow, leaving Red Elk standing sentinel before the now blank cliff face. The gateway had been opened. Inside, the scale was bewildering. The galvanic lantern beams sliced through the darkness, revealing a chamber of impossible proportions. Walls, floor, and ceiling were fashioned from the same seamless dark material, cool and smooth to the touch. They curved upwards, meeting at an apex lost in the shadows far above, suggesting a space vast enough to dwarf any cathedral built by man. The air hummed, a low, resonant thrum that seemed to emanate from the very structure itself, vibrating deep within their chests. "Incredible engineering," Greaves muttered, his voice hushed, echoing strangely in the immense space. "Beyond anything conceivable." Calder moved deeper, her lantern casting dancing shadows. "There are no pillars, no visible supports," she observed, her scientific mind grappling with the impossibility. "The geometry, it feels wrong, non-Euclidean almost." Wren swept his rifle barrel across the darkness, senses on high alert. The silence, apart from the omnipresent hum, was absolute. No scuttling creatures, no dripping water, just the profound stillness of something ancient and dormant. He felt watched, not by eyes, but by the structure itself. As they advanced, guided by Calder's questing light, they began to discern shapes within the gloom. Positioned centrally in the vast chamber, dominating the space, was an object that stole Wren's breath. It was the triangle, or rather, a triangle. Identical in shape and proportion to the object he'd seen over Kansas, but larger, far larger. Easily 200 feet along each edge, it rested silently on the dark floor, its surface the same matte black, absorbing the lantern light. 3 points of faint luminescence pulsed softly at its vertices, mirroring the lights he'd sketched in his notebook. It wasn't resting on landing gear or supports. It seemed to hover fractionally above the floor, held aloft by forces unseen. "The object from your report, Wren," Greaves breathed, awe warring with apprehension. "It's real. It's here." "Not just a craft," Calder whispered, circling the immense shape slowly. "Look." She pointed her lantern towards the floor near the triangle's edge. Faint lines glowed there, tracing complex pathways, converging and diverging like celestial navigation charts, interwoven with the strange glyphs they'd seen outside. "This isn't just a hangar. This is a nexus, a control center." She knelt, examining the glowing lines, her fingers tracing a particularly intricate spiral. These symbols, they speak of cycles, great cycles, and guardians, not gods, but custodians, keepers. Her brow furrowed in concentration. There are references to temporal echoes, causal manipulation. It's unlike any language structure I've ever encountered. Ren kept his distance from the colossal triangle, his scout's instincts screaming caution. He scanned the chamber walls. They weren't blank. As his eyes adjusted, he saw that the walls themselves were inscribed with impossibly fine lines. Vast, complex patterns that seemed to shift and writhe at the edge of his vision. It was like staring at a map of everything, everywhere, all at once. Suddenly, a section of the wall nearby flickered. The smooth black surface dissolved into a momentary image, startlingly clear, yet fleeting. Ren saw vast, fern-choked jungles under a swollen alien sun, monstrous reptilian creatures moving through the foliage. Then, just as quickly, the image vanished, returning to inert blackness. "Did you see that?" Ren asked sharply, whirling around. Greaves and Calder looked up, startled. "See what?" Greaves demanded. Before Ren could answer, another section of the wall shimmered. This time, it showed a desolate, windswept plain under a sky filled with two moons. Strange, insectoid beings scuttled across the rust-colored dust. It lasted only a second. "There!" Calder gasped, pointing. "Temporal echoes?" The hum in the chamber deepened, resonating like a vast gong struck somewhere in the mountain's heart. The lights on the triangular craft pulsed brighter, shifting from soft white to an intense, cold blue. The glowing lines on the floor flared, illuminating the entire chamber in an eerie lattice of light. "What's happening?" Greaves shouted over the rising thrum. Calder, still kneeling by the glowing lines, cried out, snatching her hand back as if burned. "I touched it! The central spiral!" The air crackled with energy. Ren felt a strange pressure building inside his skull, a dizzying sense of disorientation. The walls around them began to flicker uncontrollably, faster and faster, showing brief, chaotic glimpses of other times, other worlds. Roman legions marching, colossal machines harvesting a barren planet, shimmering cities hanging in nebula-filled skies, primeval oceans teeming with bizarre life. It was like standing inside a broken chronoscope, history and possibility flashing past in a nauseating torrent. "The system!" Calder yelled, scrambling back from the glowing glyphs. "We've activated something." The great triangular craft shifted. A low, powerful vibration emanated from it, shaking the very floor beneath their feet. Panels on its dark surface slid open silently, revealing recesses filled with intricate, glowing mechanisms unlike anything wrought by human hands. Then, a voice spoke. It wasn't sound in the conventional sense. It resonated directly within their minds, ancient, impossibly vast, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was the voice of ages, of stars turning and galaxies forming. Recording initiated. Subjects detected. Temporal integrity compromised. Diagnostic cycle activated. Ren stumbled back, raising his rifle, though he knew it was useless against this. Greaves swore, fumbling with his pistol again. Calder stared, transfixed, muttering, "It's speaking, communicating, but the language." The mental voice continued, cold and precise. Biological signatures, unexpected variant, Homo sapiens, chronological placement, anomalous, authorization, query, pending. The walls ceased their chaotic flickering, coalescing into a single, stable image that filled their entire field of vision. They were no longer looking at the chamber walls, but through them, into a scene rendered with impossible clarity. They saw Earth hanging in the blackness of space, but it was subtly wrong. The continents were shaped differently, the ice caps larger, and swarming in orbit, like wasps around a nest, were dozens, hundreds of the black triangular craft. Contextual display. Previous pruning event. Cycle 7. Point 34. Target. Mammalian apex predator overreach. Method. KT impactor redirection. Status. Successful. Wren stared, horrified as the image shifted, showing a massive asteroid hurtling towards the planet, nudged fractionally by beams of energy emanating from the triangles. He remembered the fleeting image of the reptilian creatures. Pruning event. KT impactor. My God, Calder whispered, understanding dawning in her eyes. The dinosaurs, they didn't just die out. They were removed, culled. The perspective shifted again, zooming into Earth, but this time showing flickering scenes from human history. Pyramids rising, empires falling, culminating in images of the recent war between the states, the battlefield horrors Wren knew too well. Current cycle, September 12th. Species of interest, Homo sapiens. Observation phase. Complete. Assessment, rapid technological advancement, high aggression, potential for uncontrolled expansion. Threat index rising. The mental voice paused, a silence more terrifying than the pronouncements. Query. Are subjects agents of intervention or symptoms of imminent convergence? The floor beneath them vibrated harder. The air grew thick, heavy, charged with power. The lights on the Great Triangle pulsed ominously. They hadn't just found an ancient hangar. They had stumbled into the control room of the entities that shaped life on Earth, beings who viewed extinction events as pruning and humanity as merely the latest experiment, an experiment potentially nearing its termination date. They were trapped inside the machine that judged worlds. The mental voice of the custodian echoed not in their ears, but in the core of their beings, a chillingly objective pronouncement that stripped away millennia of human presumption. Humanity wasn't the pinnacle of creation. It was a variable in an equation, a cycle being monitored, measured, and potentially corrected. The images swirling on the chamber walls shifted again, no longer showing the past, but flickering possibilities, glimpses of potential futures branching from their present moment in 1882. They saw cities of gleaming metal towers reaching towards skies choked with smog. They saw barren wastelands where ghostly figures huddled around flickering fires. They saw mushroom clouds blooming over terrified populations. The destructive power Wren had only dimly conceived of in artillery barrages magnified 1,000-fold. They saw strange, silver-suited figures stepping through shimmering portals, and other scenes too chaotic, too alien to comprehend. Each flicker was a potential trajectory, a consequence of the rising threat index the custodian had cited. Convergence point detected, the mental voice stated, the calm tone making the words even more terrifying. Multiple timeline probabilities collapsing towards critical threshold. Current subject's interference accelerating process. What does it mean? Greaves demanded, his voice tight with fear and ingrained authority. What convergence? The termination of unstable iterations, the culling of disruptive branches, the preservation of the core directive. Earth's biosphere is a cradle, uncontrolled expansion threatens the integrity of the experiment. Your species exhibits accelerated potential for self-induced extinction and extrasolar contamination. Calder, her initial scientific awe replaced by dawning horror, pushed herself to her feet. Experiment? You've been manipulating our history, the extinctions, the course of evolution. We are custodians. We nurture. We prune. We ensure the continuity of potential within acceptable parameters. Interventions are rare, triggered only by imminent threats to the long-term viability of the planetary cradle or the core directive itself. Your species is approaching such a threshold. The great triangular craft in the center of the chamber began to emit a low, guttural thrum. Energy visibly crackled around its edges. The very air seemed to warp around it, like heat haze rising from asphalt. But cold, chillingly cold. Wren felt a profound temporal dislocation, a nauseating lurch, as if the present moment was becoming unstuck. He saw ghostly after-images of himself and the others flicker at the edges of his vision. Echoes of choices not made, paths not taken. He saw a phantom image of red elk standing not outside the sealed entrance, but beside them, chanting in low Lakota, his hands raised towards the craft. "It's fracturing time," Wren gasped, gripping his rifle, the solid weight a small anchor in the dissolving reality. Just like the flashes on the walls. Temporal stress detected. The nexus is active. Subjects are within the event horizon. Event horizon? Calder echoed, her mind racing. It means a point of no return. A boundary. Correct. The boundary beyond which causality is no longer linear from your perspective. You are unanchored. Suddenly, the chamber around them dissolved. One moment they stood on the polished floor of the alien hangar. The next, they were staggering under a blazing sun, surrounded by ferns the size of trees. The air was thick, humid, buzzing with unseen insects. A monstrous bellowing roar echoed nearby, shaking the ground. Through the foliage, Wren glimpsed the scaled flank and massive clawed foot of a creature straight from the visions on the wall. A dinosaur, terrifyingly real. Greaves fired his pistol wildly, the shot deafeningly loud in the primeval air, startling the creature which crashed away through the undergrowth. Just as quickly, the scene shifted. They were ankle-deep in mud, freezing rain lashing down. Men in tattered blue and gray uniforms clawed at each other in a brutal melee. Cannon fire erupted nearby, showering them with earth. Wren recognized the chaos. It was Antietam, the bloody lane, the ghost that haunted his waking hours made terrifyingly solid. He saw men he knew fall, heard screams he remembered. "Make it stop," Greaves yelled, overwhelmed. Another shift. A sterile white corridor stretched before them. Figures in strange silver suits moved with silent efficiency, ignoring them completely. Through a window, they saw a cityscape unlike anything imaginable, vehicles flitting between impossibly tall spires under an artificial sky. Time is fluid within the nexus. The custodian's voice resonated, a calm anchor in the temporal storm. Your perception struggles to process non-linear reality. These are echoes, probabilities, moments accessible from this control point. They snapped back to the hangar, the familiar dark walls reassuring despite the terrifying context. They collapsed to the floor, gasping, hearts pounding. "It can send us anywhere. Anywhen," Calder breathed, wiping sweat and temporal residue from her brow. "This facility is a node, a means to observe and interact across temporal dimensions. It is how custodianship is maintained. The craft in the center pulsed again, the blue light intensifying. A decision point is imminent. The convergence requires resolution. Your presence has forced the timeline. One path forward must be selected. Others must be pruned. Selected by whom? Wren demanded, pushing himself up, rifle still ready. By the mechanism, by the directive, or by a new custodian. A section of the floor near the triangle glowed brighter. A complex, multi-layered glyph appeared there, pulsing invitingly. The nexus requires an operator, a sentient biological interface to guide the process, to make judgments within the established parameters. The previous custodian cycle has expired. The implication struck them like a physical blow. It wasn't just judging them. It was offering one of them the power to judge, to prune timelines, to guide humanity's destiny, or perhaps its extinction. Become like you, Calder asked, horrified. And yet, Wren saw a flicker of intense curiosity, the scholar tempted by ultimate knowledge. To accept the mantle is to transcend linear existence, to serve the core directive, to ensure the continuity of potential. The alternative is system correction. The images on the walls shifted again, this time showing Earth engulfed in fire, oceans boiling away, the planet rendered sterile under the silent watch of the black triangles. System correction. Planetary sterilization. Greaves stared at the glowing glyph, then at the terrifying potential futures, his expression unreadable. Duty, power, survival. Wren thought of red elk outside. He thought of the Lakota stories of spirits and gateways, of forces that demanded respect, not control. He thought of the Kansas sky, clear and blue before the impossible shape appeared. The custodian's voice echoed one final time, offering the terrible choice. One must choose to guide, or all will be pruned. The convergence is now. Decide. The humming of the great craft reached a fever pitch. The air crackled. Time itself seemed to hold its breath around them, waiting for a decision that would determine the future, not just of their small expedition, but potentially of all humankind. Wren, Calder, and Greaves stood at the precipice, facing an impossible choice within the heart of an ancient alien machine that held the past, present, and future of Earth in its unknowable grasp. The event horizon was upon them,